I am Vinnie Tortorich. Folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean, guaranteed. Just like the guest on the other mic today. This guy, we go back a good ways, almost to the beginning of this podcast, and he's been on several times. Always a great guest. He's been in two of my documentaries, Fata Documentary and Fata Documentary 2. And he's always bringing the goods. I like bringing this guy back because he's a cardiologist. He understands the heart. And a lot of times you guys will say to me, especially the newbies, they will say to me, hey, man, I lost weight. My A1Cs are down. My triglycerides are in check. And my cardiologist wants to now put me on a statin. And I'm always going, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell your doctor what to do, but you might want to take a second look. And this is one of those guys that would help you take that second, third, and fourth look. I'm talking about none other than Dr. Bret Scher. Yeah. How's it going, brother?
Thank you. Thanks for that intro, Vinny. You know, it is fun to think back about how far we go back, and having been on each other's podcasts, I've had different variations of my podcast, and it's been great. Every time I get to sit down and talk to you, it's been wonderful. And your documentaries were so impactful. It was an honor to be part of them. So thank you for having me back again.
Speaking of your podcast, folks, you can find Dr. Scher on YouTube and on his podcast, which they're one and the same, right, Bret? I mean, the YouTube becomes a podcast or vice
Correct.
versa. And It's called the Metabolic Mind podcast and YouTube. So, and Scher is not, it might not be spelled the way you want it to. It's S-C-H-E-R. So don't put in like garden shears or, shears to cut your hair, because he won't come up that way. So go check out everything Bret is doing. He is the dude when it comes to this. Bret, I said it in the intro. I can't tell you how many times, I do these consults 5 days a week. And I did 3 of them today. I do somewhere between, probably average 3 a day, somewhere between 2 and 5 every day, 5 days a week. And the biggest question is, hey, I've lost 100 pounds or 150 pounds. I'm doing great. They've taken me off of Mounjaro, metformin, and Wegovy. Like, some of these people are on 3 and 4 of the same drug. My doctor's taken me off of 3 of the 4 that are dealing with blood sugar. My A1Cs are now, they were at 10. Now they're below 5.6. You hear all these wonderful things. My triglycerides are now in the 40s. They used to be 400. All these crazy numbers. And I'll go, man, that's great. And I'll say, well, why are you calling me? Is this just a victory lap? And I'll say, well, my doctor wants to put me on a statin. And I always tell him, my attorney makes me say this. I need to tell you at this point, I'm not a doctor and I cannot give you medical advice. But we can talk around your issue. But I will advise you to go find a doctor. And a lot of times I'll ask these people, just for asking, what's your total cholesterol? And these numbers are very rarely over 220, right? They're like 198, 215, 218. Sometimes you'll hear 250. And I'll say, so your doctor wants to put you on a statin? And I'll say, yeah. And I'll say, do you have the test in front of you? And they'll say, yeah, it's right here. I had it pulled up. I knew I was going to be talking to you. Tell me about your ApoA and your ApoB and your small dense particles. Can we talk about? I don't see that here.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Did your doctor always, did he say he wanted to cast up your left arm? Because it's not broken, but why not put a cast on it? You might break it later on. Is that what we're talking about, Bret, or am I missing the boat somewhere?
Oof, there's a whole lot in there. And yeah, I mean, it's such an important point. And just like you said, well, your lawyer makes you say, I am a doctor, but none of this is medical advice either. And the reason is because it can be complicated and does have to be individualized. The problem is medicine, the way it works today, doesn't do complicated, doesn't do individualized. We do cookbook medicine. We do guideline-based medicine, treating everybody virtually the same. And it sounds bad and it sounds reductionist. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, I'm a doctor, I don't do that. And nobody sets out to do that. But when you've got 10-minute appointments, you've got a waiting room full of patients and you're late and you've got 50 charts you have to look at still, that's what happens. You don't have the time to do the deep dive, to look beyond what the basics are and what the guidelines say. And so, when you try and weigh the benefits and the risks of metabolic health versus LDL, it's a discussion and a thought process, unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't want to have. Now, in our community, in this low carb community, we're way more progressive than the average doctor. And that's amazing. But the question is, how does that filter down to the average doctor? And it's podcasts like this. It's you talking about it. It's people going to their doctor and saying, well, hang on a second. If my metabolic health has improved so dramatically, does that LDL have the same impact as it does if I didn't have good metabolic health? And what beyond LDL can we look at? And that's the big thing. There's so much more than just LDL that we can and should be looking at for cardiac health. And you've already brought up a number of them. ApoB, ApoA1, what is that ratio? What are my small dense particles? What are my inflammatory markers? And of course, all the metabolic health markers. And it's this whole picture that we want to evaluate and not just react to the LDL, but guidelines and frankly, a lot of, dictates in medical practice say treat the LDL and they don't look at the broader picture. So you're absolutely right. We are not seeing the whole picture as we should.
Bret, I famously tell this story over and over on the podcast, and I'm going to give you the quick version of it here. And I'll never tire of telling this story. When we moved out of California, Serena and me, and we moved to Virginia, for the first time in my life, I had to get a GP, general practitioner. And Serena goes, you need to get a GP. And I said, honey, why do I need a GP? And she said, because you're not around your famous clients anymore. And I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, think about it. You need a GP if something bad happens to you to get you to the next doctor. Whenever you had cancer, you didn't have a GP. One of your famous clients got you to the top of the rung, right? They got you there. And for the first time in my life, I had to go in and get a GP. Mm-hmm. So I went to this woman. She came highly recommended. And I go in, I take the test, and, she takes a lot of blood from me that day. And she did a good comprehensive, probably spent 30, 40 minutes with me.
That's great.
Which I thought was amazing, right? Asking me every question she was shocked. She goes, wow, your heart rate, and you're just sitting here. You're not completely rested. It's at 43. I was like, well, I'm a big aerobic guy. I'm trying to explain, look, I'm not the average 50-something-year-old guy. I'm going through all this stuff. I was late 50s at the time. And we're doing all the things. Wow, you're in perfect health. And she takes all this blood, and she calls me back about a week later. And I'm driving in my car when I get the call. And she goes, got all your numbers back. And she goes, your blood is that of a man half your age. She's bragging about how good a shape. She goes, your triglycerides were 38. We never see that number. Yeah. And this was this, and that was that. And all of your blood markers, she goes, I can't believe you're a leukemia survivor and all that. Everything is great. I went, Doc, thanks. I really work hard at it. I really appreciate it. She goes, but there is one concern. And I said, oh, what's that? And she goes, your cholesterol was a bit high, your overall cholesterol. And I need to put you on, and I'm quoting her, a light statin. I don't even know what that means. A light statin is
that like a light beer?
Yeah, it's like, is that like a Miller Lite? Is that like a Natty Light? What are we talking about here? And I said, well, why? And she goes, well, your number was creeping up towards 200. And we don't like to see that number go over 200. And she goes, don't worry. I don't want to alarm you, but your LDLs and your HDL, your ratios were perfect. But we need to put you on the statin.
Yeah.
So I said, well, Doc, few things here. no one told me I was taking a cholesterol test. I was not fasted when I came in. And she goes, oh, well, we're going to have to run this test again. I said, okay. I said, number 2, same thing you just said. You said my LDL and my HDL were perfect. Did you mix into that equation that you said my triglycerides were 38? Because that would connote heart disease if that number is higher. I said, did you check my small dense particles? And she goes, are you a doctor? I said, no, I just play one on TV. But you wanted to put me on a drug. I wasn't fasted. I didn't know the test I was going to take. No one told me to fast. You never asked me if I was fasted. You just wanted to put me on a statin. And she said, I need to stop you right there. I think you need to find a new doctor. And I said, well, I had already made that decision. We're just talking now, right? But that's, can you believe that she wanted to put a cast on an arm that wasn't broken?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, first of all, if your triglycerides were in the 40s, not fasted, that's amazing. Fasting usually affects the triglycerides more than anything else. So that's impressive.
By the way, all I had that morning was heavy cream in my coffee, but I didn't tell her that.
Yeah.
Right?
But what if you would have asked, all right, well, that's interesting, doc. So what is my, 10-year risk of having a heart attack? And if you put me on a statin, how much does that change by? What's the absolute percentage risk for me? And, my guess is she would not have been able to answer that question. But if she did, the answer would have been pretty dang small, on the order of 0.5% or maybe 1%, if that. And that's assuming you're like everybody else who was in the studies, which you're not. You're much, much healthier than everybody who is in the studies. So as you peel away the onion, you see that the recommendations and the guidelines do not really apply to you as an individual. And that's the problem. And we can do so much better. I mean, was there even an offer for a calcium score? It sounds like not.
Oh, no, the calcium score was in my report from my last calcium score that she got from LA.
Okay.
And it was a 0.
Oh, gosh.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, Bret. I forgot to bring up that part.
This is just getting better and better.
I have a 0 calcium score. And she didn't even care to bring that up. But it was in my, go on. I didn't mean to stop you.
No, I mean that you're just making my point. I mean, goodness. So finding another doctor is definitely the right thing to do. I mean, you got to know that we can do better than an LDL, which doesn't mean LDL is worthless. Like I don't appreciate or I don't like when people say that, but it is not a standalone marker that we should use for risk prediction. And so calcium scores, looking at the arteries themselves, is so much better. I mean, this work that Dave Feldman and Nick Norwitz and Matt Budoff that they're doing in this lean mass hyperresponder population. So the population with a dramatically elevated LDL, but very good metabolic health with good HDL, good triglycerides, and they're in ketosis. One of the things that's very glaring about their findings is the predictor of plaque is plaque, not so much LDL. So if you really want to focus on whether someone's at risk, you look for plaque. You don't look for LDL. We can do so much better than just looking for LDL. Then you can use the entire picture with the metabolic markers, with the lipid markers, together with a marker of plaque to say what is your true risk and how aggressive should we be with treating you. And they take it one step further in their studies, looking at CT angiograms, which are even better than calcium scores, but not really accessible for most people. But calcium scores at this point are pretty much accessible for everyone, wherever you are.
And by the way, folks, medicine or your insurance company is not going to cover that calcium score test at all. But if you got between $100 and $150 laying around, you can go get it yourself. Any hospital, any medical center will do it. And it's only, Bret, is it still between $75 and $150?
Yeah, it really depends on where you go. And, interestingly, in my practice, I've seen some people get it covered by insurance. Now, no means is it widespread that it's being covered, but I was shocked to see a couple of people say, yeah, they didn't take any payment. My insurance picked it up. I was shocked. So maybe we're starting to see that trend change a little bit, which I think we need to for sure.
My wife still, because she still does acting jobs, so she still gets that SAG insurance, which is the world's best insurance. They don't cover it. And I figured if SAG didn't cover it, nobody's covering it. So it's interesting to know that people are coming around on that. So go back to plaque. Plaque is kind of this word that people hear. They don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Pretend, Bret, that I'm in third grade and you want to explain the heart and plaque and blockage and where plaque comes from. Go ahead and regale me in third grade.
Yeah. So if we're talking about the blood vessels that bring blood to the heart, they can have blockages build up in them. And blockages are basically narrowings as the vessel narrows. And it's a combination of substances that start to make that plaque. And that can harm you in two ways. One, it can slowly build over time to the point where the artery is so narrow that the blood flow is diminished to your heart and you get chest pain and trouble breathing because the heart doesn't get enough blood and oxygen. The other way it can harm you is this plaque can actually be what's called vulnerable and break off and rupture. And when that happens, it's almost like an emergency in your heart. All these, everything wants to stop the rupture, and it's what we call clotting factors that come in and make a big clot and completely block the vessel. And that's when you have a big heart attack. So the key is, one, you want to prevent the plaque. But two, if you have the plaque, you want to make sure it's as stable as possible so it doesn't rupture. So it's this buildup of fatty material, waxy material, fibrous material. Sorry, a third grader wouldn't understand that, but this material that builds up in your heart. Now the question is, why does it happen? What starts it? And that's amazingly as simple of a question that is there's a lot of debate and still some not clear understanding about it. But the best evidence that I've seen shows that there has to be some sort of damage to the vessel. It doesn't just magically appear, but if there's some sort of extra stress or damage to that blood vessel, what we call the endothelium, the glycocalyx, the linings of the blood vessel, that's when you can start to see this reaction, this inflammatory reaction, this buildup of plaque that then starts. But without that damage, or that, the vessel undergoing the stress like that, it seems like the risk of developing the plaque is much, much less. So that's where we have to consider not everybody's the same in terms of their risk, because what is happening at that vessel level. So rather than using a blood test, you can actually look at the artery itself and see, is there something happening in this artery? So calcium scores are very good for that. They will show you the calcified plaque. Yes, it's true. They do not show you the non-calcified plaque or the soft plaque. The percentages, though, are very good. If you don't have any calcified plaque, it's extremely unlikely to have non-calcified plaque. It's not zero, but it's very unlikely. So, when it does happen, people make a big deal out of it because it's rare. But it is a good marker for the evidence of plaque in your body. But interestingly, the calcified plaque is not necessarily the plaque you worry about. It's more the canary in the coal mine. It's more the warning sign that there could be other plaque there, because it's more the soft plaque that is more likely to break off and rupture and cause the heart attack. So it's more of the marker for what may be going on as well. So hopefully that's explained it somewhat.
It did. I want to get more into it, but I need to do a quick ad. Folks, if you want to fix your plaque, you need olive oil. I'm kidding. I don't know if olive oil will fix plaque. But I do have questions about fixing plaque right after we do this ad for Villa Capelli olive oil. Villa Capelli is the longest running sponsor on the show. I use it here. Anna Vocino uses it. I actually use it in my vitamin D3 supplement over at purevitaminclub.com. You want to take in good olive oil every day. It's a good oil. And the problem with the oil, a lot of the oil in the United States, like if you go in and buy a big brand like Bertolli or any of these, you'll notice that they stock grocery stores all over the nation. Well, they can't just put 100% pure olive oil. There's not that many olive trees on the face of the planet to do that. So the government allows, these big companies to cut the olive oil up to 40% and still call it 100% pure olive oil. I don't know how that works, but we have a wacky government. And as a matter of fact, some of my questions today to Dr. Scher is about how we might be fixing that in the very near future. At any rate, Villa Capelli You want to save 10% every time you go to Villa Capelli. Put in promo code Vinnie, VINNIE. You'll get 10% off. Promo code Vinnie, VINNIE. No wimpy Y. You'll get 10% off. If you spend more than $125 after the Vinnie discount, you'll also get free shipping. In other words, if you buy one of those big 3-liter tins, which will last you forever, it's almost a gallon, folks, if you don't understand what 3 liters is. It's not a gallon, but it's close. I think 4 liters might be a gallon. Pretty close. At any rate, go get Villa Capelli, spend some money. You'll get free shipping and the Vinnie discount. And we're talking to Dr. Bret Scher. Bret, Mark Cucuzella, I think you're familiar with Mark.
Oh, yeah. Great guy.
He was explaining to me, we were sitting down one night somewhere having a drink. And he was explaining to me that in the military, these young men have to have calcium scores of 0, the ones that fly, like the Top Gun, the guys that are flying these really fast jets, because they're pulling G's all the time. And they can't have a calcium score of anything, or when you bank into these turns and pull G's, you can literally rip the calcium away from the heart when you start pulling 4 and 5 G's on these guys. And they do the training where they pull that many G's on people. I don't know how much truth is in that, but that was his understanding of what goes on in the military. So I understand military people having to have a 0, fly boys, Tom Cruise, Top Gun guys need to have that 0 calcium score. But when people call me and I don't have an answer for them, right? And they'll say, hey, I had the CAC, I had the test, and I had a calcium score of 70. Should I be concerned?
Yeah.
And my answer is, I don't know. And I'll even say to them, let me put you at ease, because I don't think the test shows hard plaques versus the soft, malleable plaque. How does that work? And should they be concerned with something in the 50s, 60s, 70s, going up to 100? Because some people call me with calcium scores of 300. I don't know the answer. I'm not a doctor. What say you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that is fascinating about the G forces in the military. That's the first I heard of that, but that is fascinating. I'm going to have to ask Mark more about that. I'm very curious. But in terms of what's a calcium score you need to be worried about, the problem is there isn't a clean answer. So clearly 0 is what you want. It's what's called a negative predictive value. So the test has a very good negative predictive value, meaning if it's negative or if it's 0, then it's very predictive that you are at a very low risk. Now, when it is not 0, one thing is it's very age dependent, right? Because a calcium score of 50 in a 40-year-old is very different than a calcium score of 50 in an 80-year-old. The prognosis is very different and the risk prediction is very different. So one is, what is your age? So when you get a score, you also get an age-based percentile. So for that 40-year-old with a 50, I'd have to look it up, but they might be in the 80th percentile. Whereas for the 80-year-old, they're probably in the 20th percentile, right? So it's very, very different in terms of where you stand according to your peers. But then, we like to, again, make things simple. So usually it says, we say from 0 or from 1 to 100, and then from 100 to 300 and above 300, that's all garbage. That's all garbage because it depends on what are you trying to determine and how old are you and what else is going on with your health. So if, what I want to say is everybody with a positive calcium score should get a CT angiogram. I know that's never going to happen. That's what I like to do in my practice. If someone has an elevated calcium score, you have no idea when that calcium was put down. You have no idea when that plaque happened. And this is the weakness of the calcium score. There's no timestamp to it, right? And you don't know what the soft plaque is. So this is where I like to get CT angiograms, where you can tell so much more. Unfortunately, that's not accessible for most people. But what you can do is say, okay, maybe we'll follow the calcium score over time and see at what percentage, which annual percentage it's increasing. If it's below like 10%, maybe up to 15%, there are a couple studies that suggest that's a good prognosis, that the calcium score is increasing, but by a little bit, that's a good prognosis. we don't have just buckets and buckets of data on this, unfortunately. And again, it comes down to the individual person. So it's hard to say what is a okay or worrisome calcium score, but clearly 0 is what you're looking for. And then if you can dig deeper, you dig deeper.
So, all right, let's say a 60-year-old has a calcium score of 50. A year later, it's, if I'm doing the math right, 57.5. That's about 15% above.
Okay.
I can do that math in my head. You would sit there and go, okay, this is okay, right?
I would say based on the 2 studies that I've seen, that predicts a lower risk with that degree of progression. Now, of course, you want to know what else is going on in their life. Just like LDL is not a standalone marker, a calcium score is not a standalone marker, but I think it's a much better marker than LDL. But you look for other things that you can address. So I'm going to treat that person much more aggressively than I am someone with a calcium score of 0. Now, what does that mean to treat more aggressively? Well, that depends. What's their blood pressure? What's their LDL? What's their ApoB? What's their ApoB1? Right? All these things we're talking about, which I would be less concerned with the calcium score of 0. I'm more concerned with a calcium score of 57.
Right, which comes back to my story with the GP. If a GP says, "Hey, you have this number," and say, no, it's not enough. Now you need to go and do your homework. You can't just trust that doctor. You need to go to someone who specializes in that. I almost hate to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. I've never brought it up on this podcast before. I'm not going to mention names, but I've had doctors on the show off air. I've had long conversations after these podcasts, and I've had a couple of doctors tell me that you can actually lower your calcium score by some amount, and the formula is always, tocotrienol, vitamin E, not the regular, not the tocopherol, mixed with vitamin K and vitamin D3. And I want to say magnesium, but I could be making up the magnesium part. But if you take these things in combination on a daily basis and never miss, I've had cardiologists tell me that, oh, you can lower it by 10 or 15% per year. You're never going to get rid of it, but instead of having it increase, you can either get it to hold steady or lower it. Have you heard this? Do you know anything about this?
Yeah.
Did I get the formula right? I know it's vitamin E, vitamin K, or
K2. Yeah, vitamin K2.
MK7, MK4, MK7, whatever.
So yes, I've heard it. I've seen people on social media post scans. I've had some patients come to me saying that they've done the same. Now, first and foremost, not always, but in my experience, it's often a technical issue. So, you could get a calcium score at one facility today, get it at another facility tomorrow, and you're going to get 2 different reports, right? 2 different numbers. There is a subjective analysis, a subjective part of the analysis. So it's not 100%. And if the images are a little blurry, remember the heart's moving, the heart's beating and moving. So the scan has to try and capture it when it's not moving. So if there's any movement artifact, it elevates the score. So all that to say, I'm skeptical every time I hear it. And my first question is always, is it a technical error? If it is not a technical error and someone lowered their calcium score, that's great. I don't know what it means, right? For me, I don't care if someone lowers their calcium score. I care that they're not developing soft plaque, that they're not developing new plaque, and they're not developing vulnerable plaque. Because remember, the calcium is usually in the wall of the artery, right? So if you think of the artery as a hose, you've got the plastic wall, and then you've got the inside where the blood runs. So again, not always, but most often, the calcium is in the wall of the artery, and that's not what's affecting blood flow or going to break off, and cause the heart attack in the center of the hose. Frequently, that's going to be the soft plaque that's bulging into the artery. So that's what I'm most worried about. Unfortunately, calcium score doesn't tell me that. Again, that's where CT angiograms can be much more helpful in viewing that. So for me, the goal is not reducing your calcium score. I tend to have other goals with my patients. Now, this is where a test like a carotid intima media thickness test,
Whoa,
CIMT.
hang on. That's a lot of words there.
Yep,
I'm in third grade. Go
I'll
back.
slow down. CIMT, carotid, your carotid artery,
Mm-hmm.
your intima media, which is basically a layer of the blood vessel thickness. So CIMT. So you're measuring how thick this part of the artery is. And what's good about this test is it can worsen or get better relatively quickly. And again, it's a marker, right? It's a suggestion of what's going on in the vessels of the rest of your body. But to me, that's a better marker for progression or regression than a calcium score. So that's the other thing people can do if they have elevated calcium scores. They can get this ultrasound of their carotid artery, and they can follow that for how that changes based on what they're doing. Do they change their lifestyle? Do they start a drug? Do they take a supplement? Whatever they're doing, you can measure the effect of it in your carotid artery. Now, the caveat is it's not your average carotid artery ultrasound that you just walk into your doctor and they order. Is a much more specialized test that not many facilities do. But if you can find one that does it, I think it's worth getting, because to me, that's a better marker than just does your calcium decrease.
Good to know. All right. This is the first time I've ever brought it up on the show that, supplementation may or may not help. It certainly couldn't hurt, is my thought whenever people bring it up to me. It's like, MK7, good for you. Knock yourself out. Don't take too much. You'll start bruising.
We don't have great studies on a lot of the supplements, because there's no pharmaceutical company that's set to make billions of dollars by studying it. So people aren't studying it as much, which is unfortunate. I wish we had better studies, but certainly from the anecdotal experience of people taking it and what studies we do have, it seems pretty reasonable. I actually have a friend who did research on, I want to say it was like 38 milligrams or like 40 milligrams of vitamin K2. And most vitamin K2 supplements are in micrograms, maybe 500 micrograms, right? And he did a study with almost 40 milligrams looking at bone health, and it was safe and effective. And it was like, wow, well, if at that dose it's effective, what are these 500 micrograms? If it was safe at 50, 40 milligrams, what's the risk of taking 500 micrograms? So, we have to triangulate data like that, but certainly is an interesting question.
By the way, folks, I'm going to just do a public service announcement. If you're on blood thinners, do not mess around with too much vitamin K2, which also comes under the name of MK4 and MK7. That stands for menaquinone 4 and menaquinone 7. If you're on a blood thinner, do not take too much K. You can bleed out in the middle of the night. So don't, just because Dr. Scher and I are talking about people taking 40 milligrams of this, do not. If you're on what is Coumadin? What are the blood?
Yeah, so Coumadin is the big one, and actually, what vitamin K does is it reverses Coumadin, so it may cause you to clot and reverse the effect of Coumadin.
Okay.
Because vitamin K is a clotter. Now K2 has less of effect than vitamin K1, but we can't say it's no effect. So if someone's on Coumadin, I would never use vitamin K2 either, and it makes me nervous if they have a clotting history for sure, and if they're on blood thinners for that. But something like fish oil, high dose fish oil can cause you to bleed more. And so that combination of a blood thinner and high dose fish oil, certainly you could bleed out. So there are some concerns with supplements. They're not completely benign when combined with prescription medication. So hopefully the physicians are aware enough of that.
And if they're not, you bring it up, go to Dr. Google, check it out, talk to your doctor after you Dr. Google it, and do it that way, because the last thing we want anyone to do is to hear this and go, oh, wait, I can buy some of that on Amazon tonight, have it tomorrow, and you'll have a problem. And we're trying to fix problems here. Speaking of fixing problems, I'm gonna touch the third rail tonight. And I always tell you, you're not in the subway station, stay away from that third rail. It's a live one. And the third rail is one Mr. RFK Jr. I'll tell you this. I was at some rally in DC a few weeks ago. I was asked to go yah and rah at this rally. And then after the rally, I was sitting around the table A couple of people I didn't know, but I knew most of them. Close friend Nina Teichos was there. Good friend Georgia Eden, her wife were there. So it's this kind of this round table of friends, pretty much people that have been in my movie, plus a couple of people who invited me to this rally who I didn't know, brand new folks. And they said, Vinnie, you seem to have your finger on the pulse of, what goes on and, getting people excited about things. What do you think? Because they were all talking about a groundswell, with eating right, low carb, eating more meat, eating more animal protein, groundswell. And they said, what do you think? And I said, we can groundswell this for the next 50 years and we will not beat big food because they'll just keep, they got more money. They're going to keep winning. And then someone at the table said, well, what do you think will work? And I said, look, I don't talk politics, but here goes some politics. I said, if Donald Trump wins and RFK, because RFK had already thrown his support to Donald Trump, and RFK is able to do some of the things he thinks he's going to do, if that can happen, we might start to see a change. Now, if Donald Trump does a Donald Trumpian thing and somehow fire RFK in week number 3, and we know he does things like that, or if RFK is thrown out after 4 years because Donald Trump will be done, then this will go back to the old way. But I said, our only chance right now is that RFK has got his finger on the pulse and he might be able to affect change. Now, love him or hate him. Some people think, oh, he's an anti-vaxxer, which I'm not really sure what that means. People think he should have a tinfoil hat and all this different stuff. But he seems to be talking a good game when it comes to the Food and Drug Administration. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first thought is, what took so long? Like, why did it take some, whatever you want to say, controversial individuals to come in and start talking about health and start talking about health divorced from pharmaceutical industry influence, big food industry influence, right? Why was it shocking for someone to say, we need to focus on health and have kids not eat sugary cereal with chemicals and dyes in it? Where's the controversy there? I don't get that. How is that a political statement? To me, that has become a political statement is shocking and incredibly depressing. I mean, this should be the rah-rah moment that we all, no matter where you live, no matter who you voted for, no matter what your political background, everybody should be all in on whatever we can do to improve the health of society and our kids. And that means getting them off of these sugary cereals that somehow have been labeled as heart healthy because they have a little bit of whole grains in them. So they're labeled as heart healthy. But what do they do to your overall health and your blood sugar and your metabolic health, et cetera? Why does focusing on making people healthier have to be political? So that's something that bothers me about the whole discussion for sure. And the problem is, you look at history of attempts to address sugar sweetened beverages or added sugar or anything that negatively affects these behemoth companies, and they're immediately met with hundreds of millions of dollars of lobbying efforts, and it just dies. It just dies because of that. So what you need is somebody who's willing to stand up to that and call corruption and fight it with everything they have. And that's why it's become political, because of the system set up like that. But if you took a step back and said, well, why does the system have to be that way? Why can't we put health first without these outside influences? It just makes total sense that it should be that way. So yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts. Now, I hope the underlying message of improving health and improving the quality of our food isn't lost because of other distracting messages, right? If someone wants to focus on the tin hat or what they think is anti-vax, and because of that, it takes away everything else he's saying, all right, then you're losing the forest through the trees. But hopefully we can just hang on to this one message of whatever we've been doing for the past 50 years ain't working. We got to change it up. One place we can start is get rid of industry influence and really focus on what makes us healthier, what makes our food system healthier. And if we can do that, we're gonna change things, and it's gonna save so much money down the road. So that's what politicians care about, right? But it's gonna save people. It's gonna save lives. It's gonna make us a healthier country and individuals. So that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. His uncle, John F. Kennedy, I'm 62 years old. So back in the early 1960s, he decided to create the presidential physical fitness test. My whole time going through school, starting in about, I want to say third or fourth grade, we had PE class where we had to sweat every day. We had to go outside and, they had us running and, in fourth grade, right? We were doing this. And we started the physical fitness test in fifth grade, the presidential physical fitness. It was a big deal at my school.
Yeah.
And we went through the whole thing. Cut to, I want to say about 7 or 8 years ago, around 2010. So a little longer than that. It was 2010. I was training a celebrity. I used to train a lot of celebrities. I was training a celebrity, get this, because the celebrity had to lose weight because she had signed up with one of the big weight loss companies. So they had to show before and after. So they took the before photos, and then they had to get 50 pounds off of this woman. She wasn't going to do it using their product. They hired me to train her and put her on a diet. And then, so I was part of a lie, right? And those are kind of things that made me write the book and start the podcast, because I was part of that lie so many times.
Yeah.
And I took the money. I just, I was trying to make a living. This woman had to lose weight. I'm not the one, the commercial people, doesn't matter. But part of our workout was I was taking her out to the high school in Calabasas. They had a beautiful track out there. And we would show up. And while we were on the track running laps, because she hated being indoors, the PE class would come out, the bell would ring, we would see a bunch of kids meander on into the middle of the field. So it was one of these really nice football fields with the turf, the soft turf and the whole thing. And they would just kind of sit around in groups and talk to each other. Every now and then, you would smell a little weed coming from that area, right? So these kids were vaping weed and whatever they could do, right, just to get high. And the two PE teachers, one male, one female, they would walk around the track, just do circles around the track. One guy would just kind of swing his whistle on his arm, on his fingers, and the whole thing. And every day I would watch this. So one day my client and I said, hang on, I got to talk to these teachers. And I said, look, I don't have a kid that goes to school here. My kid goes to the high school, the private school down the street. But I got to know, you guys come out here every day. You're both teachers, right? Is one a teacher? No, we're both PE teachers. Okay, you got about 45 kids over there, and they're all sitting on the infield, and you guys are just walking around the track. And the guy goes, I know it looks bad.
At least he admitted that.
I said, should I ask why you're not motivating these kids? And the other teacher butted in, and she goes, every one of those kids have a note not to work out. Every one of them have an excuse. Every parent fucking wrote an excuse for these kids not to work out. I said, everyone. And the guy teacher said, you see the guy kicking the ball into the volleyball net, into the soccer net? Yeah, he goes, he's on the soccer team. He's not one of them. There was one kid kicking balls into the net.
Yeah.
Practicing his moves, right? 1 out of 45. Yeah. I put the word out on this podcast. I didn't want to become part of the I know my friend Nina is trying to get a position with RFK, and a lot of people are trying to get a position. I think Sean Baker's trying to get a position. I didn't want to become part of that popularity contest of trying to get a position, but I put it out there. If they want me to reenact the presidential physical fitness test,
yes, please
do it. I will do it for God and my country. All they have to do is ask. I don't need a paycheck. I don't need anything. I don't even know there's a paycheck involved. I don't want it. If there's a pay, I want the money to go back into the system. But I would be the guy to take his uncle's physical fitness test, put it back in school, and reenact PE. And I can tell you, I'm going to go to schools and make sure that if you got a note, I need to know what the medical problem is. It's not good enough that you have a note from home.
Yeah.
I need to talk to your doctor. I bet you I could turn this around in one term, the entire thing, because
we're not
helping kids by not letting them exercise.
Mm-mm.
I didn't mean to go on a rant there, Brad. But
no, it's a good rant. I mean, you're spot on. You are spot on. And I hope someone's listening and gets you that position, because we need that. I remember that too. You had to run around the track in a certain amount of time. You had to do so many pull-ups. You had to do so many push-ups, and you actually you were responsible for having an outcome and training your body to get that outcome and doing something physical. It's we live in rarefied air, unfortunately. I'm very active. You're very active. My kids are very active. My friends are very active. That's not the majority of society. And
right.
It's sad to see what the majority of society is in terms of physical activity. And it goes hand in hand with poor nutrition. And that is a awful, awful combination. And that's why we are where we are now with our metabolic health crisis. And it doesn't just stay with metabolic health, right? Metabolic health and mental health are so related and influence each other so much. And that's why we're also in a mental health crisis right now. And, it's a shame that people haven't been able to connect these dots earlier and to say, maybe it just seems too overwhelming. Just, what, throw my hands up. The parents don't want their kids doing it. Food, the junk food is everywhere. What can I do about it? It's too big of a problem. I could see how people could react that way. I don't want to piss off my constituents who, I'm in Georgia where Coca-Cola is. I don't want to make my voters, unhappy, and the people who work for Coca-Cola. It spirals, right? But someone's got to be brave enough to say, no, health comes first. And we're going to take the step to make sure health comes first. Physical health, physical fitness health, nutrition-based health, how that affects metabolic health, mental health, it's all related, and we're going to take a stand. So I'm glad to hear it. Whoever's doing it, I am happy to hear those words.
Yeah, look, if it's not me, I hope they get something other than a celebrity, because I remember once before I tried to do it, and I think Bush brought in, one of the Bushes, I can't remember if it was the first or second, brought Arnold Schwarzenegger in. And I went, great, he's way into exercise, but it was just a political ploy to get him into politics, and then he ran for governor after that. He didn't do anything. He went and did a couple of things where you saw him with kids around him. Hey, I'm Arnold, and the kids are around me, the whole thing. Nothing changed.
Yeah.
What changed was kids are sitting on the infield smoking dope while the teacher's twirling a whistle in Calabasas. Nothing changed. And that's what bothers me.
Yeah.
Right? We need a big change. And, the aforementioned Georgia E talks about that, the mental health and the food that we eat, right? All of these processed foods. And I've asked Georgia, what do you think about exercise? She goes, oh, it's a huge part. It's a huge part. I've had people like Seyfried and some of these other doctors on the show talking about that. It's like kids aren't moving enough, right? When you talk about brain health and getting smart, you need to move. And when you have kids not doing that, we have people talk about, epidemics and pandemics and all kinds of demics out there. Is this not an epidemic or a pandemic at this point?
Absolutely.
The number of people that are dying. I have doctors telling me they don't want to say it on mic. They don't want to say it on camera, but they'll say to me off camera, I can't weigh my patients anymore. I'm not allowed to weigh my patients. That's a, what's the term? Microaggression or an aggression. If a doctor can't weigh a patient, we got problems. We got bigger problems.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And weight, I mean, even just using weight is such an blunt instrument, but if you can't even use that, what are you using? I mean, everybody should be getting a body composition test, right? Everybody should be getting detailed analysis of their metabolic health. And those are the things we need to improve. And it's a shame that we're not there. So hopefully we're taking steps to get there, though.
Bret, as always, it's wonderful having you on. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Folks, go look up Metabolic Mind. It's on YouTube as a podcast. Look up Dr. Bret Scher. I'm going to spell his last name again. Scher, not like Rhonda Shear. Yeah, do you know who Rhonda Shear is? Are you too young?
I don't think I know who Rhonda Shear is.
Rhonda Shear is a close friend of mine. She's from New Orleans originally, and she went out to Hollywood. She went to Hollywood so long ago that you know when Fonzie used to click his fingers and girls would run up? She would be one of the extras that would run up. And then she made her name in Hollywood by doing a show called Up All Night, where she would introduce Friday movies, kind of like an Elvira of sorts.
Oh, cool.
And one of the smartest women I know, and then went on to QVC and made a fortune. She designed different, push-up bras and all kinds of stuff. I love Rhonda like a sister. And but she spells it a little different than you. So whenever I see Shear and Shear, it's just a little different. Folks, go check out Dr. Bret Scher everywhere. Also, to put your name in for the VIP group. We're going to open that up again probably close to New Year's. If you want to be part of the Vinnie Tortorich VIP, go to vinnietortorich.com/VIP. Put your name in. When we open it up, you guys can sign up for that. Everyone loves the VIP. It's been going on for a year, and we're not going to stop it. It's kind of like a boulder rolling downhill. It's just getting faster and faster and stronger and stronger. We're all shopping right now for Christmas gifts on Amazon. Before you go to Amazon, go to vinnietortorich.com. Click through the banner. It puts coal on the fire, gets my train down the track. I don't have a website for you here. Is it just Metabolic Mind? Bret?
Yeah, best website right now is metabolicmind.org. Yeah, and then lowcarbcardiologist.com is the other one where my practice is based.
Go check it all out. On behalf of Dr. Bret, and Bret, don't go away. I want to talk to you off the air. Yep. On behalf of Dr. Bret Scher, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with enthusiasm.